DESIblitz.com.
Hello everybody and welcome to this DESIblitz event this evening. Thank you so much for joining us for our event, Women of Colour in Publishing. This event is part of the DESIblitz Literature Festival, which has been created to support authors and creative writers with a South Asian background. And there are, I believe, events running until the 1st of October. As in previous years, the festival celebrates the work of established writers and provides opportunities for new voices to be more widely heard. My name's Abda Khan. I will be hosting this event tonight, which I'm so excited about because we've got three amazing women with us today. I'll shortly be introducing our panelists, after which I will be embarking on an interesting discussion with these three. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. And then we will pause sort of halfway through for some questions from the audience. If you have any questions, please do put them in the chat box as you think of them, because we will pause to answer your questions. If your question is directed at anybody in particular, please can you put the name in there so that we can direct it to the right person, right? So without further ado, as they say in the makeup tutorials, I'd like to now welcome our three panelists. So let me introduce firstly Hana Juku, who is an assistant editor at Hamish Hamilton, an imprint of Penguin UK, and she works on literary fiction and non-fiction. She is the series editor for Black Britain, writing back with Bernardine Evaristo, and she's always looking to commission thought-provoking fiction and non-fiction with a particular focus on underrepresented voices and stories. Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you so much.
Next, we have Puja Agarwal, who is the Director of Academic and Professional Publishing at Bloomsbury Publishing plc. She's over 16 years' experience working within the industry. She started her career with Macmillan in 1999. She went on to work for Nature Publishing Group before starting her current role at Bloomsbury in July of this year. Welcome, Puja.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Farhana Sheik, a writer and publisher. She's the editor of the Asian Writer magazine, and she manages a small independent press, Dahlia Publishing, which is committed to championing underrepresented voices. In 2017, she won the inaugural TravelX Penguin Next Great Travel Writer competition and was longlisted for the 2018 Spread the Word Life Writing Prize. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, ladies. And I think before we get into the meat of the questions, I just wanted you to talk briefly, just a couple of minutes, just a few minutes each, about your journey into publishing. If we can start with you, Hannah.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It's so great to be here with all of you, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about your experiences as well, because I'm sure we'll have lots in common and lots that we want to talk about. So I have been with Hamish Hamilton, the imprint I currently work with, for the last 3 years. I joined on an editorial traineeship scheme called The Scheme, run by Penguin, which is like a 6-month traineeship that's aimed at people who are generally underrepresented in publishing. So that could be across race, gender, sexuality, disability. It's quite a broad remit. And also I think included people who didn't go to university and who lived outside of London. You know, really, really kind of shows how limited the publishing industry traditionally has been in the types of people who've kind of been able to thrive and work there. There were 10 of us. There was one of us each placed in each division across Penguin. And so I joined Hamish Hamilton at that time. And then I ended up staying on as editorial assistant and then being promoted to assistant editor. And I'm now in a commissioning role there. So, you mentioned the Black Britain Writing Back series that I've worked on this year, which I'm really proud of and has really kind of helped me engage with some of the anxieties, I guess, I have around where we're at currently with publishing in the UK and how it elevates minority voices and kind of what the staff makeup looks like. That's been my journey.
Fabulous, and I'm sure you've got lots and lots more to do and achieve yet. So well done on everything you've achieved so far. If I could turn to you next, Puja, if you could just tell us briefly how you ended up especially in your very niche kind of publishing.
Yeah, and the truth is, I actually ended up here by accident. Is the truth. Like a lot of people, I left university and didn't really have a clear idea of what I wanted to do. And I'm going to give you my age here now, but back in sort of 1999, it was traditional kind of, do you go down the law route? Do you go into medicine? Do you go into business? Do you go into the civil service? So I applied for so many things. And the one bit of feedback I kept getting was, you don't have enough work experience. And that's because I didn't. I'd never done an apprenticeship. I'd never done an internship. I didn't even know those things existed. I grew up in Southall. My parents still live there, a town in West London. And they were market traders. So my holidays and weekends were spent working with my parents. So I didn't have the luxury of getting work experience. And then, somebody said, well, there's lots of graduate trainee schemes. Why don't you try them? And I hadn't even thought of publishing. I really hadn't. But I applied to the graduate trainee scheme, and they must have liked me, and I got the position. And I thought it'd only be for a couple of years, get that work experience that everyone keeps telling me I need to have, and then I'd figure out where I wanted to go next. 22 years later, I'm still here in publishing. But I've been very lucky that I've had the chance to move up and work in different parts of the business. So I've worked in trade publishing, I've worked in academic publishing. As you mentioned, Abda, most recently, I've spent the last 17 years working in science publishing. And now I've almost sort of come full circle back to books again in the humanities and social sciences at Bloomsbury. So it's been quite a journey, but not one that was planned, but one that has actually worked really, really well for me. So sometimes, things happen for a reason, and here I am.
Oh, fantastic. And you know what they say, don't you? Whatever's meant for you won't pass you by. So however you got there, and it was meant for you, obviously. Yeah, brilliant. For Hana, if you could do the same, if you could just let us know about your journey into publishing.
Yeah, so, God, going back a while, I actually read publishing with English at Loughborough University. And that was really my way into understanding what publishing was. And then I actually went off and had children, which I don't think was very sensible, but it worked out well for me because it gave me time to think about what I really wanted to do. And actually I came back to publishing through writing. So I set up the Asian Writer in 2007 and started just really showcasing and profiling South Asian writers, people who who looked like me, but I didn't see represented in mainstream newspapers, profiling their work. And all of these were published writers at the time, I should say. And that actually formed like a little community of people like me who were trying to, improve their work, develop their craft, and at the same time figure out what publishing was really about, what this industry looked like. But because I had the background, I think 3 years in, I was quite frustrated. And I was like, well, there's all these great writers and they're not being published. And I've got a degree in publishing, so why not start a small indie press? So that was in 2010. And Dali has been going from strength to strength since. But obviously, again, it wasn't really planned. I didn't necessarily have a business plan or anything like that. And it's just really grown organically, very much working with at the grassroots level, looking at different communities and what they sort of need. And just this year, actually, we got our first Arts Council funded, our first Arts Council grant to actually support 20 short story writers and 12 tutors. So I think short stories have really been the thing that have stuck, and that's primarily our focus at the moment.
Fantastic. I love the way we've got a full spectrum here, from the really large to the small publisher. It's fantastic to have that sort of array of talent here in one place. I'm just in awe. Right, so Hana, I was reading an article about you, about the fact that even though you grew up in a mixed heritage household, your mother's, I believe, now correct me if I'm wrong, your mum's Scottish and your dad's Nigerian, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
You went from state school to study in Oxford, which is a great achievement, and then another great achievement that this young woman has achieved is that she was the first Black female president of her college. Can I just say that, at Oxford? So that's just absolutely wonderful. But coming back to my point, sorry, I digress. You said that when you went from state school to Oxford, that was the first time that you became aware of your race, the first time that you felt that you were different. Can you tell me a little bit about this and like how that impacted you and how that perhaps shaped your outlook?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I have quite a unique kind of story in terms of where I've grown up in the UK. So yeah, I was born to my Nigerian dad and my Scottish mum, and I was born in London. We lived in a council house and kind of grew up in that environment. So obviously was kind of at a very diverse state school at the time. So kind of in that environment, race didn't really register almost for me because it was so diverse and it wasn't really I didn't really feel kind of out of place in that environment. I then moved to a little village just outside Glasgow where we were the only family that wasn't white, but again I was quite young and kind of not hugely aware of what that meant. And then we moved to Manchester, where again, it was a very diverse state school. So kind of just didn't hugely have to interrogate it. Was very lucky to kind of, feel very much kind of part of the culture around me. And then I went to Oxford and it was a completely different situation, which, I basically found out from day one. So there were a number of instances that kind of made me understand how I was seen by a lot of people, especially people from extremely kind of privileged backgrounds who hadn't had much, hadn't spent much time with anyone of colour, and to kind of, to confront that. So one example that I always bring up is when my family came to visit me and someone else in my college called security to say that there were kind of 3 dodgy looking men wandering around the college, and this is like my 2 teenage brothers who were like 12 and 14 at the time, just truly like ludicrous, but it was just like one example of the kind of microaggressions that were constant during my time there, but in some ways I think that really has had a huge impact on what I see as valuable and important to kind of champion. So that it was because of having that experience and kind of having this huge reckoning with how I was seen that I decided to run for college president, which you mentioned, because there had only been one woman before me even in the college's like entire history, never mind anyone of colour, and I thought that would be and you know in that role you get to sit in the board meetings and kind of have these meetings with really high level members of staff who can have really big kind of policy influence on access and diversity and outreach. I was elected to that role, and that year I think did kind of totally changed my life. I felt really, really empowered as well in that role, in being like an advocate and getting to talk about these issues that I cared about so much, and have seen since I've left and kind of in that time there's been a huge shift in access and the kind of numbers of people from state school backgrounds and from minority ethnic backgrounds who now go to that college, and some of that is because of policy that was influenced at the time and kind of changing attitudes. I think that experience really has influenced my career path as well, and meant that that's very deeply, and also in a more positive light, I feel very empowered and have seen that it's possible to make shifts in very traditional institutions. And I will say, I do think Oxford, mirrors publishing in that sense, because publishing is an incredibly traditional industry. I really had no idea, again, before coming in, kind of how entrenched some of the practices are, the ideas are. Just the culture in general is very similar. The kind of resistance to change is very overt, even kind of from a junior level. It's very obvious. So yeah, I think that's why that experience was such an important one for me. And obviously it's a journey, kind of understanding your own identity, especially when you are kind of straddling two cultures or live in a country that's not the same one that your parents were born in. But that I will say was like a really kind of pivotal turning point for me.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think that it's great that you ran for the presidency, because I often say that if we're not part of a narrative, what we're doing to change it, So sometimes, if you're instead of just sitting and moaning, we kind of have to jump in. And yes, there might be uncharted waters, or it might be difficult at first, but nobody brings about change by doing nothing. So good on you, Hannah. That's phenomenal. Puja, coming to you. I think I read an interview of yours where you said that your first boss at Macmillan, Ray Fiddler, was a great role model for you. He taught you a lot about the industry, just from things like problem solving to how to interact with different people from different walks of life. How important was that initial kind of like mentorship, if you like, in keeping you within the industry? And do you think that we need more mentorship schemes and more opportunity for these kind of like schemes to emerge, so that women of colour can be attracted to the profession? How much do we need to do that more for women of colour, is what I'm saying, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the irony of all of this is, the mentors that I had, including Ray, but also Richard Charkin, who gave me the graduate traineeship in the first place, were all white middle-aged men. And, because when I entered the industry, there was nobody who looked like me. So it was very difficult for me to find somebody to look up to and a role model. And as I said, I hadn't planned to come into publishing, so I really knew nothing. So I started from scratch, and I was very lucky that I had mentors like Ray and like Richard, who actually taught me the business and actually invested time to teach me. And I think it's hugely important, because if I didn't have them, I probably would have left publishing. But, they gave me the opportunities not just to learn about the day job, but to actually learn about the business, about what is publishing about, what fundamentally are we trying to do here? And the different aspects to publishing. Publishing isn't just about editors sitting at a desk reading a manuscript. There are several different departments that make up a publishing house, and there are so many different roles. And the move to access online, and the move to the different way people now read content and books and other pieces of work has changed so much over the last decade, and is constantly changing now. And they taught me to question things. They taught me to really put myself out there and ask those questions and get involved in those meetings. And I never felt sidelined from that. And I feel very lucky, because if we had more people like Ray and Richard actually in the business who did mentor and bring people up, I think, we would be in a very different industry to where we are now, but it's never too late. And I think that, there are now some very good mentorship schemes. Individual publishers are doing them. And I know that, across the industry that there are initiatives as well. And I think it's hugely important. But the thing about encouraging more women, but obviously women of colour, is making them know that these things exist in the first place. I can only speak of my own experience, but nobody told me that this could be a pathway for me. Nobody sort of said that this might be something that you would be good at. I literally, fell into it, as I said, because all the other options I got rejected from. So I was almost sort of, going through all the traditional routes and the companies and management consultancy and advertising agents, everything. But I think it's that access and that knowledge and that education as well that we need to really do more work on, because you will only get people applying if they know there is something there to apply to. And you can't assume that people know. They don't all read the Guardian newspaper and they don't all go onto the same job website. They don't know. So I think, yes, mentorship schemes, absolutely crucial, has been absolutely crucial for me to stay in this industry. But we need to do more to make sure people know that these opportunities are there.
I've been to because of my children, and also because I've been as a solicitor to, fairs at schools, where different industries turn up, and I've never seen a publishing company there. You see lots of the traditional professions, and you see some of the creative professions as well. But I've never personally seen a publishing company come and say to kids, yes, you can go into publishing. It's something that you can do. But it's just food for thought, isn't it, Puja? I think at the end of the day, yeah.
No, it is. And I think, we do a lot to target, I guess, university students and at that sort of age. But yeah, I think you're right. It could start much, much earlier than that. The minute a child can pick up a book and start to read, why aren't we thinking about at that stage telling them, well, there's a whole big world out there that you can be a part of. And so it starts much sooner. Absolutely. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. For Hana, we've known each other for quite a number of years now, so I know how passionate you are about diversity and equality in the publishing world. Now, you mentioned this before, and you say that your evolution, of your work from writing to producing the magazine to then setting up the publishing company has come about quite organically. But if you look back now, what sort of help from the industry would you have found beneficial to you? Do you think, if you can look back in retrospect, what do you think would have helped you now when you look back?
That's really interesting, because I think I had a good grounding of what publishing was about just from doing a degree in publishing, as you would if you went to study any other subject. So I think for me that foundation already existed, and maybe in some respects, I didn't seek it out, because, if you're rallying against something, you're not really going to go and seek out those networks. But obviously I was already aware that they existed. So I think being in Leicester is another one that we don't really think about, in the sense that, the only really reason I went down the route that I did was because publishing is in London, and London is expensive, and that is not accessible to someone who is in Leicester. So I think for me, publishing, I think it is a bit disingenuous, some of the conversation that we're having, in terms of, why do we not see publishing at fairs? Because by design, publishing wants to attract certain candidates from certain universities and not other ones. I went to Loughborough. Had I gone to a different uni, my path might have been different. By design, we are looking at an industry that is still primarily very white, very middle class. So for much of the talk that we see on social media, a lot of these statements being made, there isn't really, even if we look at some of the organisations set up to support small presses or independent publishers, are they really interested in things that are happening outside of London? I'm not convinced they are. So,
but do you not agree, for Hana? It's also about perception, in the sense that if you don't, the problem is that if you get the feeling that you don't fit into an industry, because that's what the industry, those are the sort of vibes you get from that industry. It's like a catch-22, isn't it? If you don't feel like you will fit in, then you won't try to fit in. Do you know what I'm saying? So I think that
I don't think so. I don't think we have those problems in other industries, do we? I think we if you go to the library, which, let's face it, okay, if we're talking about publishing in a different way, everyone has access to books. We all feel like we can pick up a book and read a book. So I don't think that it's something that we should be held responsible for as consumers. I think it's definitely something, and I don't think the small presses, people don't get that vibe about the small presses. They do get that vibe from the bigger presses. They don't get that from small presses, which are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. for the bigger publishing houses.
Yeah, that's the point I was making, that it's all London, it's London centric, and it's quite white and middle class, and that's the point I was making, that if you don't see yourself reflected there, then you might think you don't fit in.
But are we talking about working in publishing, or are we talking about the authors who publish with us? Because in the academic area, it is quite different to trade, because you're talking about people who are scientists, who are researchers, who are academics themselves, who are working in very diverse fields, from, oncology and cancer research all the way through to medieval history and gender studies. I mean, it's vast. And although I don't disagree with obviously the fact that we need to do more, I think things are changing, certainly on the academic side, which is, where I am based in. I think things are changing. Historically, look, when I joined, these weren't even things that we discussed back then. I remember not seeing anybody looking like me, but it didn't stop me. And maybe, this was 20 years ago, so things have changed. Of course they have. But these things just weren't discussed back then. You just got on with the job, and you'd like to think that you did a good job and you got promoted for it. But I think that the whole thing about being London centric, I think, is an issue. But I think in the academic area, by virtue of where academic research is and the funding universities get, it is a bit more global, and there is more opportunity for us to be able to work with people from different backgrounds, from different universities, because ultimately we're looking at who's researching in what area. So I think there are differences, to be noted within publishing, differences between trade publishing and non-trade publishing. So, I think we just need to bear that in mind. It's not a one size fits all by any means.
No, well, absolutely not. Sorry, can I just come in there? Because I wasn't at all saying that, but academic publishing is probably the part of publishing that is not as visible as trade publishing, and neither is the small press.
True.
So, maybe some of when we're talking about publishing, generally people assume or are looking at the trade publishing.
Yeah, no, I think that you're right there. And I think there is a lot of things that are actually happening on the academic side that perhaps are not so visible. And that's one of the things that, just listening to you, I'm thinking about, that it's, again, being more visible and actually letting people know that these things are happening. And there's more work for sure that we all have to do on that. But I think I can see that things are slowly moving in the right direction.
So hold that thought. I mean, my next question is that do you still think then, in that case, that publishers are still undervaluing the potential of a BME or South Asian audiences, both economically and culturally? The sort of impact that they could have, or the contributions that they could make. Do you think that's still undervalued?
So I think, to a large degree, yes, but I think it is changing. I think it is getting better. Look, we've just been through a pandemic, right? And the one thing that has come out very clearly is that you've either learned how to cook or you've read a lot of books. And so people have picked up books and started reading a lot, and not just fiction, but, gardening books, cooking books, non-fiction books, biographies about people. The Black Lives Matters movement has very firmly put, books on people's radar, like around race and around Black history. And people are reading things they probably wouldn't have read before. And I count myself in that category as well. And so I think things are changing. But, and I think Hana said this earlier, is that, when she was talking about Oxford, is that change is difficult. People don't like change because it's the way things have always been done. And to move away from that means you have to question what's always been done. You have to question yourself. You have to question the environment you're in, and the things that were true yesterday are not true today. And how do you bring people with you on that journey? So I think we do still undervalue, the BAME communities. But I do think that the tide is shifting slightly, and I think that we are definitely moving in a direction where we can start to see some of that.
Hana, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I really agree with what you're saying. It's a difficult one for me because I've only been in the industry for a short while. But in the time that I've been here and kind of talking to colleagues who've been here longer, I do think you're absolutely right that there's been a pretty huge acceleration really in the last kind of year or two of how we've talked about our audiences and kind of what people would like to read. And to be honest, a lot of that is in quite a cynical way, like in a, we've seen that we can get sales like in this area, so we're going to focus more on some of those readers, is what some of the higher level conversations are like. But it's important that at least the conversation is kind of starting to be on the table, and that kind of recognition of sales potential and audience potential is there. But I think what is really lacking is the fact that kind of, especially when we talk about audiences, I think we have to focus on kind of the communications teams within publishing, who that's kind of their focus, is to think about how we're marketing a book, who we're marketing it to. Yeah. And I think we're still very slow in the kind of number of women of colour, people of colour who are kind of in the senior levels in those teams. That's kind of true across publishing, but that's especially the team who are kind of thinking about our audiences and how we might be able to reach them. And I think that means that there is quite a significant barrier sometimes within publishing houses, even if there's really great intent on one kind of in one division or in one department. I think if there isn't that kind of follow through all the way, to booksellers, and if there isn't that kind of understanding and awareness of readers that have been missed for years and years and kind of haven't been acknowledged for a really long time, I think there's still a danger that even when there's kind of good intention for those books to reach readers who they haven't reached before, I think that kind of lack of knowledge and lack of experience and lack of representation really at a staff level is still a big hindrance to that.
Yeah. I've got a question from a viewer. Amna Rahman is asking, well, it's actually sort of two questions in one really. She's asking, do you feel the traditional model of publishing is outdated? And does work published without a main publisher, i.e. self-published work, is that considered less valuable still? Farhana, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, that's really an interesting question. Thank you. But also, it's, how do you answer that? Okay, is the traditional model of publishing outdated? Well, we are seeing new models, aren't we? And we're seeing, like with Unbound, that idea of this, people rallying around supporting a book before it's published. And for those who might be aware, obviously Nikesh Shukla did really well forming that partnership with Unbound when he published The Good Immigrant. So we are seeing these kind of platforms opening up, and then also through Patreon, people just getting regular small payments for work that they're then putting out on their own. So I think, I'm not sure if it's outdated because it's a massive industry and it makes billions of pounds and it's still working and functioning in that respect. But there are newer models that I think are interesting and feel very much like they're being driven by this new energy, which is exciting. And then whether the work published without a main publisher, I'd be interested to know what a main publisher is, as someone running a small press, considered less valuable. I don't think so, because we are seeing, Salman Rushdie's, he doing something with Substack and serializing a novel, and there's more of a hybrid approach, which I find quite interesting, with writers actually bypassing the traditional publishing model, if you like, because anyone can be a publisher. All it means is to make something public. And in a simplest sense, when we're tweeting, we're also engaging and writing things for an audience. So we have that understanding. And with the digital capabilities and technologies, which, there's a lot of software that's freely available and you can do quite a lot. Whereas when I was at uni, we used something like, which probably nobody outside the industry has probably heard of, Quark Express.
Yes.
And it was very expensive. And it was like, oh, we've got this really expensive software that you all have to, get to grips with. Otherwise, you can't be publishers. We're not in that time anymore.
Yeah.
So I think self-publishing actually is a very viable route for people. And then obviously you've got the likes of Amazon and Kindle, which are allowing self-published authors to reach audiences that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to.
Yeah.
I think that's a really, really important point, because we talk about how publishers are meant to reach different audiences, but actually for the first time in our history, audiences can reach back to us, with social media, with all the things Hana said, which I absolutely agree with. It's actually easier now for you to put your opinion out there, to put your story out there, to showcase what you're doing than it ever was, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. So actually, I think it's more of a not just publishers having to go out there and find these new audiences, not even new, but these audiences are already there, but we never really paid them much attention before. But it's also those audiences fighting back now and saying, hey, we're over here, look at what we're doing. And I think social media and the way that we use the web and the internet and all the programs and apps that are now available has completely changed the way people think about telling your story. And I think on the academic side, just to give a different spin, this is the whole notion of being open access has been around for the last 10 years, which is, publicly funded grants that go to researchers to do their work should then make that content freely available. And COVID was a great example of how publishers actually made all their COVID-related research free to anybody to use, because this was about more than making money and more than about wanting more people on our website. This was actually something that we've never experienced before in our life, but research was there to make it freely available for everyone for the greater good. And so I think things like this do change the balance. Now, it doesn't happen enough and it doesn't happen everywhere. I acknowledge that, but it still does make a difference because it's making people think in a different way.
We've had some more questions in, actually, some really interesting questions coming. Hana, you might want to answer the next one. Sabrina's asking, how would a young graduate studying English get into the publishing industry?
Sorry, is the question how do they get in?
How would a young graduate studying English get into the publishing industry? What would be the best route, do you think?
Sure. Well, I think remarkably, there actually isn't that much, in my experience anyway, there wasn't that much information about publishing kind of available to me, doing just like a straight English course rather than English with publishing, which Hana did. It wasn't really something I had heard of at all during my time. So only kind of started researching as I was leaving uni and panicking about what I might want to do next, and knowing that I liked books and that was about all I knew, and then kind of came across these traineeships. But amazingly, there's quite a lot now that are open at kind of varying lengths, at very different sizes of publishers as well as agencies. So mine was a 6-month traineeship, which comes around every September. And is available to people with no prior work experience, which I have to say was really, really valuable for me, because I lived in Manchester at the time and I couldn't have afforded really to come down and done work experience and paid rent in London, essentially. I kind of didn't have access to work experience beforehand. So to be able to kind of come straight in to a program where I was paid and was learning was really wonderful for me. And amazingly, there's quite a lot of those now. So Hachette and HarperCollins also have very similar programs. I think the HarperCollins one is a year long. I think they're both a year long, actually. And again, they come around every September, so the applications for them are around kind of April, May. So yeah, I would, because of my experience, I would highly recommend applying to those. They are very competitive though, so I wouldn't kind of, if you don't get in one of those traineeships, I wouldn't kind of give up. There's so many wonderful colleagues that I have now who kind of had applied for them in the past and didn't get on, but then came in through other routes. I would say I still think work experience can be quite inaccessible if you don't live in London. As Hana was saying, like everything really is very kind of based in London, and it can be really difficult to kind of break in if you're if you don't live there. But getting experience in another industry beforehand is also really helpful. And I think I would say not to kind of devalue the transferable skills you'd be getting elsewhere. Things like project management and editorial is actually a role that kind of happens in so many different companies, as well as if you're wanting to come in through a different route, the communications route, for example, there's so many different ways you can get that experience. And I think if you're currently at university, I'm not sure if the person asked the question is there now, I would try and get involved in the Society of Young Publishers. Are really great at giving out free accessible information about job opportunities and traineeship opportunities, as well as mentorships and loads of things like that, which are all free and you can do kind of while you're at uni, while you're job hunting.
And actually signing up for email alerts and things like that is really good, isn't it? Because then at least, if there's an opening, like you've got an alert and, you can apply for that. We've got a couple of more questions. Well, actually, one's a comment. Janan Sarwar has saying to Puja, saying, absolutely agree with the change in storytelling and reaching the publishers. Publishing is absolutely the way I find out about this event. So there you go. That says it all. From the same person, a question. Do you feel that diversity, equity, I think maybe there might be equality, diversity, equality and inclusion is a trend? Is it here to stay? What is the line between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation? God, what a loaded question. Okay, let's break it down a little bit. Thank you for that. Right, is diversity, equality and inclusion a trend, or is it here to stay? Who wants to jump in? Jump.
I'll take that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, go on, Hannah, if you want.
No,
I don't mind taking it because
I've been around.
I've been around a really long time, and I think, unfortunately, I wish it was here to stay. But I think Hannah said something really interesting earlier about, they've seen that it makes money now, so that's why they're sort of holding on to it. What I would say, and what I always say to people in my own communities and my own writing groups who are very frustrated because they're banging on this door and they don't see the doors being open, is the best way we can support writers and diversity in publishing is buying books, going to events who are already published, supporting them, because it's not always just about getting published, it's about staying published. And while I think I would hope that it was here to stay, I think I see these things running as cycles. So they've come before and then, the priority is something else and it shifts to that. So I think it is a bit of a trend. And that's where I think I'll pass it over to someone else.
Yeah, I have to disagree with that, because as somebody who heads up a department, within a publishing company, one of the big bad commercial publishers, I have to say that, me being here is representative of the fact that things are changing. Otherwise, 15 or 20 years ago, you would never have director of a whole division of a big. So and it was very important to me that diversity, equity and inclusion principles embed everything that we do going forward. Now, I'm not saying we've got it all sorted. Absolutely not. Do we have a long way to go? Absolutely, yes. However, I think the way that we're treating it at Bloomsbury, and again, I can only speak for myself here, is that not only do we have a robust policy now, but we actually have employee working groups, who feed back, who are made up of. So we have a BAME employee working network, who are not only run book clubs but also do events and newsletters and really engage within the company, but also externally as well. Our recruitment goals have changed. We now use a lot of forums like Creative Access to try to widen the net of people that we're approaching. Me being here tonight, I think, is one of those steps towards the fact that we want this to be something we don't think about. It's not an afterthought. It should be part of our everyday process. And we're a long way from that. Don't get me wrong. I think that there is a lot to do, but I do think that it's here to stay, because I don't think it is just something you can tick a box off. I think as we progress, on the back of the pandemic, on the back of Black Lives Matters, on the back of, the way that the world is changing, we have to represent the societies that we live in, even more so now than ever before. And I think any company who doesn't make this something that is a foundation of their business will really miss out. And it's not just about missing out on those sales or missing out on those audiences, but actually missing out on making real effective change. In the academic world, it's about adding to those fields that are working in, changing the world around us, whether it's climate change or whether it's gender studies or whether it's about, a drug to cure cancer. I mean, these are like life-changing things. And so if we don't be diverse, if we don't widen our net, if we don't have accurate representation, then we will fall behind. And, you won't be able to survive. So anyone who doesn't take it seriously is doing so at their own peril, I think.
Hannah, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think I probably land somewhere in between both of you on that question. I would like to say I really, really hope it's a kind of long-term shift, and some of the things that I've seen happen in the last few years and the kind of rate of change has made me feel really hopeful for that. Some things that I was kind of laughed out of the room for mentioning even 3 years ago have now been implemented, things like pay bands and kind of salary transparency, which I think are huge barriers to people of colour and anyone from a minority group coming into the industry. That kind of being part of company culture, I think, has gone some way towards addressing that. My hesitation is from working on the Black Britain Writing Back series, where the kind of premise of the series is that it's bringing back books that were published by Black Britons over the last century that were kind of fell out of print and or were overlooked when they were first published. We found that there was this kind of renaissance, really, and explosion of Black writing in the early 90s that just completely kind of disappeared after that moment. And this really micro trend at the time as well, just kind of nothing that was laid down at that time really was able to kind of flourish, and none of those authors really got opportunities in the years following that. And it's only been in this kind of new revival of these conversations that's been able to happen. Not that that groundwork wasn't there weren't wonderful kind of pioneers doing that work that whole time, but the kind of big publishers weren't focused on it, and they were kind of allowed to fall out of print, and they were allowed to be overlooked. And so I do have a hesitation about these moments that crop up, and I think it's just a kind of slightly cynical worry, but I feel hopeful because there have been huge shifts. I think inside the publishing industry, we were kind of talking about the idea of doors being opened. It does feel like a door has been opened, and there are a lot more of us in the industry that are desperately trying to keep that door open and kind of get as many people through as possible. And I think that kind of feeling of urgency, I think most of us feel, like people of colour, women of colour especially, kind of in the industry, feel that sense of urgency and that need for okay, people are listening right now, we kind of really need to double down on that. And I want to feel hopeful that will be a long-term shift. I can just say that's kind of how it feels from from my perspective.
Yeah, well, you three are very, very popular, I have to say. There's so many questions coming through, so I might just leave the cultural appropriation and the cultural appreciation is going to take us like 3 hours to answer. So I might just come back if we have time at the end. I might come back to that. There's a question here from Gundas Chuk. I hope I said that right. So the question is, currently, how open are traditional publishers to publishing previously self-published titles?
I mean, we wouldn't accept anything that's been previously published unless it's for a short story collection and single short stories have been published before.
Self-published.
Yeah.
Would you go yeah.
Yeah, but we wouldn't accept like a novel. I mean, I think in industry we see it, so maybe Hannah's got a different opinion.
Yeah, I would say pretty open. All kind of divisions have very different kind of approaches to submissions and acquiring. So I'm in a division where it's largely, we don't really take unsolicited manuscripts. So most of our submissions come through agents. So it's a slightly more passive approach, I suppose, where, that's kind of how, especially we find fiction. But then there are lots of divisions within Penguin as well that are take an approach that's much more kind of active commissioning and active acquiring, and they are very, very kind of on the ball with self-published books that have gained traction or are kind of already making a mark and reaching out to those authors. I think that kind of there's definitely been a lot of innovation in that area within Penguin anyway that I've seen.
Yeah, linked to that actually, there's another question here from Hansa. What is the future of indie publishing, would you say then? I mean, you're all publishers, what's the future? Yeah.
I think it is a hybrid model, if I'm completely honest. I think we're seeing it now where, there's these kind of partnerships between publishers and authors, but also one of the things that we don't ever really talk about, and I think it is important, is that actually in some respects, going back to an earlier question about models, where royalties are concerned, we are still quite, sort of maybe not really keeping up with the times, because I think royalties do need to be looked at when we're looking at author earnings and are authors able to sustain an income. So I think the future of indie publishing might look something which is a bit more equitable. So authors are making more money from their works and their original creativity and their ideas. And at the moment, we're not seeing that. I mean, we offer 10% on royalties, and that's really, sometimes we're still selling at a loss in the small presses due to the amount of costs.
Anybody else want to come in on that? I know it's quite it's not what your field is, but I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's not my field, and I've not worked in an indie publisher myself. So, I refer to Hana on that. But I would say that, there are more opportunities now to publish. And I think Hana said it before, what do we mean by publishing? It's sharing your work, right? It's sharing your story, and everyone wants good writing. And we've already mentioned that with, social media and the way that the world is changing, there are more opportunities to get your stories out there, to get your work published. On the academic side, in journal publishing, this has been happening for years now. There are things called preprint servers where, any author can upload their Word document of their PhD thesis or a talk that they've given at a conference and get community feedback on that piece before they refine it and submit it to a journal. And this is becoming more widespread now. I mentioned open access again. And of course, for us, our authors are also academics. So we fully expect them to have done, published their PhDs, or they're talking about their work at conferences. It's already out there in the public domain. So access is an issue. But of course, what I guess, there is that divide, is that platform to get to a more global audience, in one place. And I think that's the things that that smaller publishers will always struggle with, is that difference in economies of scale. But again, if we leave that to one side, it comes back to, well, who is your audience, and what do they want? And not everybody, wants the same thing. And so I think we're all having to think about different models and the way people access content and their feedback to us as well. So I think hybrid is the word. I think it will continue to be hybrid. I think there'll be lots of different layers of publishing. It's definitely not the old traditional way of doing things anymore. And I think it will continue to change. If we have this discussion in 5 years' time, I think we'll be, talking about a whole different industry. Well, I hope so by then.
Yeah. There's another question from Hansa, and that is, what top tips would you give on marketing and publicity to stay published? Do you have any top tips? Any advice?
Very simply, you've got to get yourself out there. Use social media as much as possible. Use platforms like LinkedIn, like other writers groups, community platforms. Even forums like DESIblitz and other literary festivals. The Black Writers Guild. There are so many now opportunities. You have to go out and actually do some research and find them. But there are many, many more platforms to, reaching different people, to getting your word out there, to being able to share what you're doing. But you've got to really find out and get in there. And, academia is very different to fiction, which is very different to non-fiction. So again, depending on kind of, what your story is you're telling, there are different platforms to use. But I think the key is to really increase your profile, and there are lots of ways in which you can do that now through the internet. So that's the way, just in a nutshell, the most immediate thing that I think you can do.
Hana, do you get involved in that side at all, or are you just strictly editorial?
In the communication side?
In terms of promotion or marketing.
Yeah, so within editorial, we kind of try and help shape the campaign and give insights into what audiences we might be looking at. And yeah, I agree with everything Puja said, really. It's difficult because I know a lot of authors kind of don't want to be as visible and want their books and words to do the talking. But I think it is really valuable to kind of be able to connect with your readers in that way. And for the most part, we find that there's a way to connect that each author will feel more comfortable with. And I think it's just kind of finding what that is for you, whether that's kind of, so we often take authors on bookshop tours where they're having kind of one-on-one conversations with booksellers and readers. And sometimes that can feel more comfortable than doing a panel event in front of a large audience, or kind of having a very vocal social media presence. But I think it's just being really open to all the different ways that you can connect with readers, and trying to see it as this ongoing conversation. Like you create this work because you wanted readers it to resonate with people and for readers to connect with it, and it's just continuing what you've done there is how kind of books stay present in people's minds and kind of become part of a cultural conversation.
Right, so there's
Can I just add something? Sorry,
of course you can, Farhan, of course.
Sorry, I think that was quite a strange. I was that a response to a question or something I'd said about staying published? Whereas I would almost say, work on the craft, don't worry about the marketing and publicity. Work on your ideas, and your imagination is your strength. If marketing and publicity isn't your strength, I don't think writers should necessarily be burdening themselves with trying to raise their profile on social media, when I'm not sure we have enough data on whether people who are on there, all day, every day, are actually making more sales. Those technologies are still quite new, I would say. Probably there's not enough research to back that up, especially when we look at writers like Sanjeev Sahota, who absolutely refuses to be on social media and still is one of the most successful British Asian writers. So do what you're comfortable with, like Hannah said, but don't always feel like you have to, it's just a black hole of time, isn't it? If you're just promoting yourself constantly on social media.
I guess it's trying to find the balance in this modern day world of because what as a writer, I know that sometimes trying to promote can take you away from writing, and that's not really what you want either. So yeah, it's about finding that balance, I think. What a really interesting question here. How willing are publishers to sponsor work visas? I don't know if anybody would like to comment on that.
How willing are we to sponsor work visas? So I can only speak from my own experience. So the companies, I've only ever worked in 2 companies, but as a global publishing company, we would often have people moving between our offices. So as long as we had a region where we had an office, we were very open to moving staff around. Many colleagues went to work in other offices for 6 months to a year to get experience of working in a different region, in a different department. Reason well, because ultimately you're the person for the job. And of course, this is a whole other discussion about recruitment and about how do you define the best person for the job. But to answer that specific question, yes, I think most publishers, at least in my experience, are open to this, but there are lots of caveats to that.
Yes, yeah. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Hannah, but
yeah, I haven't had experience of applying for one.
I think with work visas, it will definitely depend on whether you fall within that category that warrants a visa. So it will depend if you've got a special skill, and if there's a shortage, then presumably you would get the visa, but not if there are people available here that could do that job.
Exactly.
Lovely question from Isabel. If you could go back in time and meet your younger selves when you first started in publishing, what would be the top piece of advice you'd give to help steer your publishing careers?
Wow.
What a great question. Thank you.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
Good question.
Quite often when I do creative writing workshops, one of the first exercises I do is I ask people to write about their younger selves and write to themselves, but they're 10 or 12, and they give themselves advice. So it's something a little bit similar to that.
I think just not being afraid and
taking the plunge.
Going for things, be brave, learn to trust your gut instincts because they're usually right. And I think when you're younger, maybe you do feel a sense of, well, I certainly did, setting up my own small press, like, am I doing everything right? And I think you don't really have to worry about getting it right all the time, as long as you're like plowing forward.
Is there anything that you weren't expecting, Puja, when you went into publishing? Is there anything that you came across and you were quite surprised? It's not something you'd expected.
I don't think so, because I didn't really have any expectations.
Yes.
So I think everything was a bit of a bonus. But I think, just following on what from Hana said, I think I look back now, and after 20 years, of course, hindsight is a great thing, right? And I look back now and I think I should have been a bit braver. I should have been a bit more vocal. I shouldn't have been so accepting of what everyone around me was saying, and I should have trusted myself a bit more. And
I think those qualities come with age, though, sometimes, don't they? It comes with your
And this is the thing, is even if I had told myself that, I'm not sure that I would have been able to do it either. It's easy for me to say now at my stage in my career, because now I can say what I think and I don't worry about what people think about me. But it's taken me a long time to get to that position. Where I can do that and feel confident and comfortable in my own skin. Like, I don't have to be anything other than what I am. But it's taken me a while to get there. I think for women in general, it's quite hard, especially, again, I can only speak for myself, but, when you come from quite a traditional family, there are certain expectations, you're certain traditions and cultures, and that's the way it is. And there's nothing with that, but it does then make you, a little bit more on the back foot about doing that in the workplace then, and actually, I've given lots of talks over the years to internal colleagues about sort of, don't be scared to speak up, ask questions, put yourself forward for projects. Don't think just because you've not done it before, you can't do it now. It's all about learning. And I have tried very hard throughout my career to bring other women up with me. And I think that's also really important, is that we support others and celebrate each other, and actually give people those opportunities to learn and grow. Because somebody gave me an opportunity once, and this is where I'm at now. I want to make sure I give those opportunities and pass it on to others. So I think just be braver about things and trust yourself. But it comes also with time and experience, and you will become stronger naturally.
Hannah, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think wonderful answers from both of you. I'm noting them down for myself, so thank you. I think I would probably tell myself not to feel so kind of anxious about what the long term would look like, and knowing where you're going to be in 10 years or even in 1 year. I came in just assuming that I would be fired at the end of my traineeship, to be honest. I would end up doing something else, and was kind of the whole time feeling constantly worried about what I should be aiming for next and where I should be next. And I think I would just say that to kind of see those early stages as the time to get to ask loads of questions and just absorb, and that's all you're there to do at the beginning is to learn, and they the people you work with
Absolutely. Right, I've got some fun questions now that I'd like to ask you ladies. Right, so my first fun question is, if you could take 2 books with you on a desert island, what would they be? Puja.
Oh my gosh, I knew you'd come to me first. 2 books on a desert island. I think I would take A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth, because I love that book, and I could read it a million times over. And I think the other book I would take is... So how long am I on this desert island for?
I don't know. I mean, I suppose you could be rescued any time, or you might be there for 5 years. Who knows? So
maybe, this is going to sound quite emotional, but probably a book full of photos of my children.
Oh,
with little notes from them. So, because, I don't know when I'm going to get rescued, right? So balance it out a bit.
For Hana, let's have your 2 books.
Oh, I was hoping that you'd go to Hannah.
I want to mix it up now. I'm not going to be so predictable.
I feel really bad answering this question. So I'm going to say maybe Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice.
Oh, that's
because that's a good
I love that book.
I do as well.
And maybe The English Patient, because I've tried to read it 3 times and I failed, so I'd have to just persevere.
You wouldn't have a choice on a desert island. There'd be nothing else to do, would there? Hannah, let's have your 2.
I'm struggling because all the books that come to mind are quite sad, and I feel like that's not really what you want when you're on your own. But I'm just going to say the ones that have come to mind anyway. One of my favourite books of all time is Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So I think I would bring that, because that's a book I reread all the time anyway. And then kind of maybe the first book that I remember really falling in love with is The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. That's the one that I'm thinking is probably too sad to take on a desert island. But in terms of making me feel connected to the rest of the world, I think that might be one that would help me do that.
Great diverse choices between the 3 of you, isn't it? Right, so which novel would you like to see adapted into a movie that hasn't already been turned into a movie? Hannah.
Ooh.
That's really...
Oh, I'm going to be really cheeky and say a book that I've worked on, but Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardina Brewster. I would love for that to be a film.
I'm
Nice
actually
one.
reading that right now, so that would be a great one. Yeah.
Go on, Puja, seeing as I've got you talking anyway, what
No.
would you like to turn into a movie? Come on.
I really don't know. Oh my gosh, no, I don't know.
I'll come back to you for Hana. Do you have anything?
Let me think.
Yeah, I do. Oh dear God. You know what? Homeboy. I can't remember the. Let me Google who wrote it. It's a Pakistani author, and he's brilliant, and I love that book. Oh God, the name.
Homeboy.
Yeah. Is that what it's called?
I don't think I've read that.
H.M. Naqvi.
Oh,
By
okay.
H.M. Naqvi. It's absolutely brilliant. It won the DSC South Asian Prize for Literature. It's gorgeous.
Fabulous. I'll have to read
Post
that.
9/11, impact of 9/11 on 3 young Muslim men.
Oh, interesting. Puja, have you thought of anything?
I really haven't. I'm going to jump on Hannah's bandwagon, and I'm going to go with the book she mentioned as well. So I'm halfway through it. So yeah, but I honestly can't think of anything else at the moment.
Okay. So for Hana, if you could choose 3 writers to have dinner with, dead or alive, who would they be?
Oh, this is easy because
imagine a dinner party with 3 writers.
3 writers. Okay, I'm going to pick all my own, obviously, because I love them to bits. Susmita Bhattacharya, Catherine Menon, and oh God, this is going to be awful, but I'm going to go with Mona Dash because I've not yet published Reshma. So yeah, all 3 because we've not seen each other for ages.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah.
No.
Hana? Dead or alive, it doesn't matter.
Okay. The first person that comes to mind is Techni Morrison. She's a huge inspiration of mine. And then can I say Chimamanda again? Again, big inspiration for me. And then, okay, I'm just doing everyone else's answers, but I'm going to pick Jane Austen for the 3rd one because I think that would be an interesting
nice
group.
one. Yeah, I think I'd like to have Jane Austen to dinner as well. Puja, your top 3 writers that you'd like to have dinner with?
I think, well, I say Jane Austen. I'm not just copying Hannah as well, but so definitely Jane Austen from sort of years ago. I think is it Rennie Edo Lodge, who wrote the book Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. I would love to speak to them. And I think the 3rd person would be Vikram Seth, because I loved A Suitable Boy, and that whole period of history in India was something I'm fascinated with. And I would love to see 3 different people from 3 different eras talking about things. I think that would be fun.
Yeah, well, can you imagine if you all had one big dinner together? How interesting that would be. It would be great, wouldn't it? As long as I can come, obviously. So one thing I wanted to ask you is that I think this is a great platform that we've got today, and a lot of people have put some really lovely comments about how much they've enjoyed it, how informative it's been. How should mainstream or even niche publishers, whatever size they are, how should they work with media outlets like DESIblitz to promote not only writers but just to engage more people from within the BME community? So one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of the times people say that people from the BME communities don't read as much as people from other communities. That's something that people will say that perhaps the readership isn't as high. I don't know whether you found that in your experience, and that might be different with academic and it might be different with sort of mainstream books. But I mean, like I said, this is a great platform, but how else do you think we can get this message out wider to new audiences?
Sorry, I'm not clear what we're being asked. Are we talking about how we engage diverse audiences with books?
How should the publishers work with media outlets to try and get this kind of what we're doing tonight, to kind of get these messages out a bit further afield? So do we have enough of you going on the radio, for example? Do we have enough of you going on the television and being representative of being South Asian or Black or BME?
I definitely think more events like, because, I've certainly not been part of anything like this in my career, and I've never heard of, specific forums. We've focused a lot on women and getting women into more senior roles, but then most of those women are still white women. And so, there's still a lot of work to do there. I've been involved with the Financial Times runs a women's forum. But again, most of the people there are white. And so, I think forums like this that specifically proactively are focused on women of color from different backgrounds with different experience, and actually for publishers like us to work with people like DESIblitz and other outlets, it's almost turning the question on its head and saying to you guys, how else can we work with you? What else can we do together to get the word out there? And I think it is also about conscious thought. I mean, real conscious thought put into planning events and outreach. And we talked about mentoring, and we've talked about schools and universities and getting outside of London and thinking about, what else is happening out there. And I think this is just the start, but, it's a good start, but, just having one panel event isn't going to change everything.
No, I mean, I was so chuffed when I was asked to host this, because I feel like this is quite a unique event. I genuinely do, because and I've been tweeting about this, and I was saying, like, where else are you going to find 3 women of colour in publishing at one event? I've been to lots of literary events and lots of book festivals, and I've never seen a panel like this ever. And for Hana, you might have done, I'm not sure, but I've never seen one with three women of colour in publishing. So, Hana, do you have any ideas on this? How we can get the word out more?
Yeah, was that at me? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry, Hana.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, one thing that I do think allies can do that they don't always do is when they are invited onto a panel, to ask about who else has been invited and what the kind of how diverse that panel is, and consider whether that's a space that they should be, or whether they should be suggesting someone else kind of in that space instead of them. Because I think you're right that there is still a kind of lack of diversity at literary events and events kind of to do with publishing. And it's, as we can see from tonight, there are people who kind of want to talk and have things they want to say, and we need to make sure that we're elevating those voices. And sometimes I think that means for other people kind of stepping away from some of those opportunities and really considering kind of what that panel makeup would look like.
Yeah, absolutely. For Hana, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Hana. I was actually on a panel earlier this year with Margaret Busby and Kimberly Redway, and that was brilliant. And it was just women of colour in publishing. And I think working with other media outlets like DESIblitz is a great one, because if we're saying there isn't the opportunity for young people to access things or find out about publishing, then if they are accessing these sort of online platforms, which have their own kind of culture and subculture, don't they, really, and following, then I think it's a great way to engage people and let them know what publishing is about, what the challenges are. So when they do come into the industry, they know what to expect. I was the only person of colour on my degree course, and so I was kind of well aware of what I was maybe up against if I did go the industry route. But I think the whole industry has a lot of work to do in terms of transparency, and things like this do help.
Yeah, I do feel like COVID I mean, it's been really difficult and it's been terrible and devastating, but it has changed the landscape now in terms of having events virtually, so that they are more inclusive. You know, somebody who's a carer can't always get out to an event. Somebody who has young children wants to write but can't get out to an event. So I feel as though we need to sort of keep hold of this and like nurture it a bit more and let it grow, so that, you know, this becomes the norm as well, that we are more inclusive in terms of who can access like advice from people, from women like yourselves. So I think that it's you know, it's evolving, isn't it, all the time? And I think that we have to just keep kind of helping it along. Looking at the time, it's nearly 8:20. It's been absolutely fascinating. We've had loads and loads of questions. If anybody wants to ask a last question, now's your chance to get it in. I wanted to do a quick fire quiz with you guys about the publishing industry. Right.
Okay.
This is really, really quick. The first answer that comes into your head. Okay, just shout at me. The UK is the largest exporter of books in the world. True or false?
False.
Hannah? Sorry, Hannah, I didn't hear you.
True, I said.
Hannah?
Sorry, I didn't even hear the question. Sorry, it's really raining that much.
You not had your coffee today. The UK is the largest exporter of books in the world. True or false?
I'd say true.
It's actually true. It's actually true. More than America, can you believe it?
Yeah.
So the publishing industry directly employs how many people in the UK? Does anybody know? Does anybody want to hazard a guess? Directly employs.
Is that just working in publishing or
directly
industry?
No, not wider industry. Okay. Direct employment.
Oh God.
I'll tell you. Give you a clue. It's between 27 and 33. It's a figure in there somewhere.
30,000.
I'd say 28,000.
Hannah?
32,000.
Well, for Hana and Puja were the closest. It's actually 29,000.
Oh.
Well done, ladies. That's pretty good.
Gosh,
over half of the executive leadership and senior management roles are held by women in publishing. True or false?
False.
True.
Senior management roles.
And executive roles. Leadership.
That's false.
Ooh.
It's actually true. It's actually true. Sorry, Puja. It's actually true.
It's true.
Believe it or not, but they are white middle class.
Right.
Since 2017, the representation of people from BAME groups has improved, remained the same, or deteriorated?
Same.
Is that workforce or authors?
No,
published?
representation of people from BAME groups within the publishing industry. Improved, remained the same, or deteriorated?
Stayed the same, I think.
Ladies?
I'd say deteriorated.
Hannah?
I think it improved.
Puja, you were right. It stayed the same. Still 13%, same as 2017. Hasn't changed. Okay, my final question. The representation of people with a disability has decreased since 2017. True or false?
False.
Anybody else?
I'd say true. I mean, are we taking into account COVID impact here or not?
Well, since 2017, so these are the figures from 2017 to 2020. So I'm asking, since 2017, has the representation of people with a disability decreased? It has decreased. True or false?
Oh, false.
Go on, Hannah, you're going to make it a hat trick. You say true?
No, I'll say true.
It's false. It's false. Actually, it's increased from 2% in 2017 to 8% in 2020, which is quite a jump.
Yeah.
Really. Obviously, BAME stayed the same. So I think we're getting to. Maybe we have another question. Actually, let's have a look. Farah says, would be wonderful if it starts at school level, as family support means so much. Many BAME families don't always encourage writers or publishing, as they don't see it as making money. How did your families react? And did you feel supported? Very, very good question.
Yeah, for me, this goes right back to studying English for my degree. I remember my dad's family saying that I already spoke English, so why did I need to study that as a degree?
Brilliant.
So,
I love it.
Yeah,
I just love it. It's a line of the evening, that is.
Sorry. Yeah, my immediate family were very supportive, but yeah, wider family less so. Now what helps them is just that they've heard of the name Penguin. And
Yeah.
I think that makes it sound fancy.
Yes, but she works for Penguin, remember?
That's it.
Exactly.
Oh, goodness. Can either of you two beat that?
I grew up, my mum just really wanted us to work in the bank, all four siblings. It was like, go and work at the bank, go and get work at the bank. But she did actually, by the time I was 18, I think I'd probably talked about writing and being a journalist or getting involved since I was about 10.
Yeah.
So when I had my choices in front of me for university, my mum was the one who actually encouraged me to go and do a publishing degree. So.
Oh, fantastic. Puja, what about yourself?
So I think my parents' focus was very much on you've got to get an education, you've got to go to university, you've got to get a degree. And then after that, I think, they never really, my brother's a doctor. So, it was like, right, you can do whatever you want to do. So I never really had that pressure. I think I'm really lucky. My parents have always been very supportive, as long as I did something, and use the education and use the opportunities that they've given us. That was very important to them. But, I think, honestly, even if I asked them today, they wouldn't really know what I did, except that I work for a publishing company. So they're from a different generation, and it's sometimes quite difficult to explain. But I feel extremely lucky. I had full support from day one. I think in my mid-20s, they were more preoccupied with me getting married, really, than anything.
Yeah.
But
it's a cultural thing, isn't it? And I think sometimes, like you said, they don't really know what you do. I've got a friend who is a senior buyer for Marks and Spencer, and relatives thought she worked at the till. Just because they heard she worked for Marks and Spencer's, they assumed she worked at the till, but she's actually the senior buyer. So it's interesting, isn't it, when you say to somebody, in the community, because it's not an industry they're familiar with.
That's what it is. It's because they don't know it. Everyone knows what a doctor does. Everyone knows what a lawyer does. Everybody knows, what certain professions are. But then I think when you get into sort of the arts and the media and more creative industries, I think there is a bit of a, what kind of future are you going to have? What kind of, industry is that you have to go into? I remember very early on in my career going to a launch party for a book, and my dad saying, but why are you going to a party? What's that got to do with publishing? And really explaining to him how making those connections and actually being able to, and it's little things like that. So they've sort of learned along the way, but again, have always been very, very supportive. And even after having children, they've been there to help raise the kids so I could carry on with my career, which has been, just amazing for me. So I think it is about education. It is about being familiar. And I think the person who asked the question, I think is right. We need to start at school level and really get the word out there.
One last question. This has to be the last one because we're nearly out of time. Juhi is asking, do you have any advice for young people whose family is not supportive of a publishing career?
I mean, just very quickly, what I would say is, you need to explain to them what a publishing career is. This is a very established industry. It's been around for centuries. In my previous role, I worked for a Nature publishing group. They published their first scientific journal in the 1800s. This is a very reputable, established industry. And there are many different facets to it, from IT and technology, and so there's lots of different opportunities there. And I think take them to an event, maybe ask them to come with you, show them there's nothing to be scared about, there's nothing to be worried about here. It's a very safe place to work. And, I think there are a lot of role models now that I didn't have when I started out. And so there are people there that can help and advise you. But if it's something you really want to do, then I think there's a lot more opportunity now to be able to educate and learn, and don't give up on your dream.
And show them this recording. I mean, how could they say no after they hear you three? I mean, absolutely. I mean, they'd be mad, wouldn't they, to say no after that? So show them the recording, sit and watch it with them, get some popcorn, and just talk them around. Did anybody else want to add anything to that?
I think Puja said it all, but just bring them on the journey. It's not scary, and I think
it's the unknown, isn't it? It's the unknown. Yeah. It's about the unknown. It's about informing them about it rather than just saying, I want to do it. They need to know what you want to do. They might not really understand what it is you want to do. But nuggets of advice from you, Hannah?
No, I agree with everything.
I still can't get over the English and the English too. Sorry. Right, that's look at that for timing. 28 minutes past 8. 2 minutes to spare. We've got 2 more questions, but we unfortunately have not got time. I'm so sorry to whoever it is who's asked those questions. Maybe DESIblitz will invite us all again next year, and we'll do this all over again. And I want to say a big thank you to Puja and to Farhana and to Hannah. It's been a blast. It's been a wonderful evening. I've really enjoyed myself. And just before I leave, I just wanted to say that thank you to the audience as well as the panelists. And just remind you, this literature festival and this event has been organised by DESIblitz, which is supported by the Arts Council. So if you want to find out any more events, please go to DESIblitz.com/arts and find out what's happening in other events around the festival as well, and any other events around that are coming up during the rest of this year and next year. Thank you so much again, panelists. You've been absolutely amazing. I'm going to give you a clap because you deserve it. And we'll say it's good night from me.
Thank you so much.
And it's good night from them. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
So much. Bye.
Bye.